Welcome back everyone, and welcome to another geo-explaining video. And today I will tell you about the migration in Europe, according to paragraph 5.4 from Buitenland in 3 VWO in TTO. Alright, so we are back in City Skylines, and I'm gonna change up these names because we're gonna use some different names. So let's pretend this is Europe on this side of the mountain, and this is like Western Europe, and on this side here we have oh shit, on this side we have Eastern Europe, and then on the other side of the mountains we have the Northern Africa, and apparently instead of a Mediterranean Sea we will use the mountains. In this chapter, migration, we already discussed globally what types of migration there are and what the consequences are for the place of origin and the place of destination. But now we'll take a look at Europe a bit closer. So this means that we will look at it from a more continental or national perspective. First, we're going to look at the types of migrants we see in Europe in the past few years and in what we see now. So first, we have the colonial refugees. In history, some of the European countries had their colonial territories, but during the 20th century, many of these colonial territories were given back their freedom. But with this, many of the people who were living in these colonial territories moved to the country which was occupying them. This is also why, for example, you see a lot of Indian people in England, or Suriname people in the Netherlands, or Moroccan or Northern African people in France. So during the 20th century, you can see that a lot of colonial migrants went from their original country to the colonial superpowers. Then you see a lot of labor migration to Europe. You can divide this in 3 different sections. With labor workers, you look at people who migrate for labor or work or economic improvements. Most of them consist of guest workers, those who come here for just a season, work and then go back to their own country. You see this quite a lot in the Netherlands, that during the harvest season or during the summer and spring, a lot of Eastern European people, for example Polish people, they move to Western Europe, the Netherlands for example, to work on the fields and earn money and then send the remittances back to Poland and eventually also go back to Poland themselves. You can see that throughout history from the 1950s, mostly people from Southern Europe went to the Western European countries. So farmers from Spain and Italy and Greece, they moved from Southern Europe to the Western Europe to work there. But with the increasing prosperity in these Southern European countries, many of them went back to their own country. So a lot of return migration back to Italy. But to still fill up the needs for the labor migrants, many of the European or Western European countries looked at countries such as Morocco, Tunisia and Turkey to get their labor migrants. And finally, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, and Eastern and Western Europe got one again, many people from Eastern Europe moved to West Europe to work and have a better economic future. Now, especially when Western and Eastern European countries are together in the European Union where free travel and trade is possible, many people from Eastern Europe move freely to Western Europe to work there. First you had the colonial wave of people, then you have the labor migrants, first from Italy and Spain and Greece, so the Southern European countries, but later on more Northern African or Eastern European countries. But you also see that there's a large group of smart and highly intelligent and educated people coming from all over the world to Europe to find better work. So if we now look at Europe as a whole, with Western and Eastern European both being the European Union, you can still see that some countries react differently to migrants than others. Maybe I should build a city here, just a small town. Alright, so now we also have Southern Europe. This makes it much easier. To look at the consequences within Europe, we have to see what the European Union has as a goal to help the migration flow go better and ease smoother throughout Europe. So the governments of all the European countries need to think of ways how they take care of those migrants and how they share the amount of migrants. So the EU and its members have thought of 4 ways to look at how to divide the migrants. So first, the taking in of refugees must happen close to where the refugees come from, or the migrants. Number 2 is that human trafficking must be tackled. So to make it possible for everyone to migrate, the system must work properly so human trafficking is not needed anymore. But with the increase of border patrols and making it more difficult for migrants to come to Europe, we are actually making human trafficking more profitable. So that's not really working out so far. Of course, you cannot take in everyone at the same time. There has to be a certain flow and a limit from time to time. So with the right amount of communication, the countries also need to make sure that there's a limit and that at some point people have to wait for a little bit, but then of course also continue with the migration. And last, all the countries within the EU must take their fair share of migrants. Because in Southern Europe you can see that many of the migrants come because it's the closest to where they come from, but they need to be distributed throughout Europe. Now, the Eastern European countries don't really feel like welcoming that many migrants. They still have some troubles from the 90s and the war going on in Yugoslavia, and they're still building up, and they are not really welcoming those migrants. So some of them go to Western Europe, but still many of them stay in Southern Europe. So you see that there's an unbalance between the countries within Europe, and this causes friction. Alright, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you learned something new about migration in Europe, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye!